Make sure, if you haven't already, please grab a parish bulletin on your way out. As we know, this is the most riveting parish bulletin in all of the Catholic Church, and especially today, it's especially powerful. But on the front cover is probably one of the most stunning churches on earth. And I mean that, I'm not speaking hyperbolically. It is Notre Dame Basilica in Montreal. And the cover that you see today, those colors are literally how it looks like when you walk in there. And it's in downtown Montreal. It's a busy street. And when you make your way towards this basilica, it's a typical city scene. And when you walk in through those doors, the sight you see is on the church bulletin. I had a great privilege of going there a couple years ago on a vacation. And when you walk in, and this is the experience of all of the pilgrims that go there, when I walked through those doors, it literally took my breath away. Have you ever seen something so beautiful that it takes your breath away? I mean, we hear that saying constantly, but it actually happens when you see something so stunning and beautiful. And you walk into those doors and it stops you in your tracks as you gaze at this beautiful edifice. That is the heart of what Catholic architecture has always meant to be. Why the most stunning churches and buildings on earth are usually Catholic churches and cathedrals and basilicas. Because if we do our job correctly as Catholic architects and builders and designers, when you walk into a Catholic church, it's supposed to look different than anything else. This is why we don't worship on a street corner or on a strip mall, or we just buy some random building or a warehouse. No, we've never done that from the very beginning of the church. Our churches always look different. Why? In the second reading today, Paul, he says this: "We look not to what is seen, but to what is unseen. For what is seen is transitory, and what is unseen is eternal." So what Paul is speaking about here is that as Christians, we have a different worldview. We see past the merely physical, and that we understand that there is a spiritual reality. And so our church architecture, through stones and wood, is supposed to raise our attention to spiritual realities, namely heaven itself. Church architecture done right, when you walk in through a church doors, we're supposed to be raised to heaven itself. And what does heaven look like? It's supposed to be beautiful, we're told. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard what God has prepared for those who love Him. Heaven is stunningly beautiful, we're told. And so when you walk into a church building that is absolutely beautiful, it's supposed to remind us of where we're going. How do we get to heaven? Ever wondered that question? If someone were to stop you on the street, especially if a non-Catholic comes up to you and tries to scare you out of the Catholic Church, to challenge you, all right, you're a Catholic? If you were to die today, how do you know you're going to go to heaven? Sometimes people get asked that question. So if someone were to come up to you randomly and you're shopping at Costco and they try to evangelize you, and someone asks you, how do you get to heaven? What are we to say? I actually began this question if you ever take a baptism class, because we have baptisms every month. I mean, yesterday we had 11 baptisms again. It was a glorious occasion. Deacon Rob presided. And if you ever take a baptism class with me, I always begin with a provocative question. I ask this question, but in a more abrupt way, by design. With all of the parents and the godparents in the hall, I'll ask, "Are you going to heaven or hell?" That's how I began the class. I served them cookies at first, of course. I'm not a jerk immediately. Are you going to heaven or hell? And I asked that question. I know it's provocative. It's like, oh, that's an ugly question. But that's on purpose. Because like church architecture, what I'm trying to do is stun them and to raise their hearts and their minds to deeper questions. Because let's be honest, how many times a day do we actually talk about spiritual things with our friends and our family and our neighbors? When was the last time you had a spiritual conversation? Well, average person? Hardly. Except for long homilies at St. Mary's. Right? So more oftentimes, now I've been a priest for over 10 years, the most common answer, how do I get to heaven, is usually this answer. I'm going to go to heaven because I'm a good person. That's the most common response I get. I'm a good person, so I'm going to go to heaven. Which is a great starting point. Because then I ask and I lead. I said, well, how do you know what is good? Who defines what is good and what is bad? Who determines what is good morality or what is bad morality? And then it leads to a deeper question. In 2005, the then Cardinal Josef Ratzinger was gathered with the other cardinals of the world who had gathered in Vatican City. And he would give probably one of his most famous homilies. It was on the eve of the next conclave where they would elect a new pope. John Paul II had just died. The cardinals descend upon the Vatican, and they will begin the discerning process of who will next succeed John Paul II. And what Cardinal Ratzinger did with the cardinals in front of him from all over the world, he laid out the challenge of the gospel that faces the church. Because in every age we have unique challenges. And this is what Cardinal Ratzinger said to the cardinals gathered. He says this: "We are moving toward a dictatorship of relativism, which does not recognize anything as for certain, and which has as its highest goal one's own ego and one's own desires." What he's speaking about here is that our current age, and this was back in 2005, gosh, nearly 20 years later, he's saying what the challenge the church faces today in proclaiming Jesus Christ to the world is that we've lost a sense of objective reality. Modern man no longer believes that there's an objective truth anymore. Rather, we believe that every single person determines truth. It's summed up in this famous adage, and I'm sure you've heard it before: what is true for you is not true for me. Have you heard that before? You live your truth and I'll do my truth. That's where this philosophical principle comes from. Is that if there is no such thing as an objective reality, then I determine what is truth. So you, Christian, you can't tell me what is true. The ego now becomes the definer. And with nearly 8 billion people on earth, that's 8 billion egos, each determining its own truth. But this tendency now to determine one's own truth, it actually is a very ancient problem. The first reading today begins where all of this began. From the reading of Genesis, from the book, God now with Adam and Eve, our first parents, it begins with this: after man, Adam, had just eaten of the tree. Now, what is the tree? Well, we have to harken back to previous verses before this chapter. And this is why, again, why the parish bulletin is so captivating this Sunday. I lay it out here. So everything that I'm saying today is all laid out in the bulletin as well, in the pastor's column. He describes the tree. God scolds Adam. You have eaten then from the tree of which I had forbidden you to eat. For this tree, God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will become like God, knowing good and evil. So one of the effects of eating from the fruits of the tree, of the forbidden tree, is that man removes God from objective reality and elevates his own self, his own desires, as the determiner of what is true and what is false. The prerogative of God we now usurp. I determine what is true, not you, God. See, this is an age-old problem. And so, in that same homily, Cardinal Ratzinger would give us the answer why, as Christians, we look at the world utterly differently. Ratzinger would continue, and I quote, "We, however, have a different goal." We, meaning Christians. The Son of God, the true man, he is the measure of true humanism. An adult faith is not a faith that follows the trends of fashion and the latest novelty. A mature adult faith is deeply rooted in friendship with Christ. It is this friendship that opens us up to all that is good and gives us a criterion by which to distinguish the true from the false and deception from the truth. You see, as Christians, the truth is objective. And in fact, the truth is a person. The truth is Jesus Christ, who says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me." Jesus is the objective reality, not me, not my ego and my desires. And so now let us return to the initial question. If I were to die today, how do I know I'm going to heaven? There's only one correct answer. Because of Jesus. Because of what he did upon the cross. I am going to heaven only because Jesus has shed his blood for me. That is the only reason. No other reason can match the glory and beauty of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And now, the main goal of the Christian life, as we heard towards the end of the gospel, is that I must submit myself to the truth, and to die to myself, and to bow my knees before him, and to conform my life to him. Who are my mother and my brothers? Jesus says, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God is my brother, sister, and mother." How do we go to heaven? And the only answer is Jesus Christ.